Please listen to me. We don't have to fight. You have the power to end it here and stop what you're doing.
Bruce, I forgive you for not saving me. But why? Why on God's earth is he still alive? I thought I'd be the last person you'd ever let him hurt. You and me and him. Now is the time you decide. If you won't kill this psychotic piece of filth, I will! If you want to stop me, you're gonna have to kill me!
Aang and Batman both subscribe to a no-kill rule. For years, comics and TV shows have told us that a protagonist's unyielding refusal to end life is the ultimate sign of moral fortitude. But a closer examination of modern lore reveals a disturbing paradox. While Batman's rule was once made an essential pillar of his character, it has mutated into a cancerous nihilism. In the modern DC landscape, Batman's no-kill rule doesn't protect the innocent, but it fuels unbridled sociopathic violence, not only rendering his heroism useless, but destroying the structural narrative logic that defined his character. Meanwhile, Aang's deeply rooted conviction to preserve all life doesn't break his story. It drives it forward. Aang's pacifism actively elevates his spiritual progression as a bridge between worlds. It further develops the rich lore of the Avatar universe, and adds incredible stakes to his explosive fight with the Fire Lord, and provides definitive retribution to a genocidal tyrant. Both Batman's and Aang's no-kill rule not only serve as moral anchors, but narrative ankle weights to intensify the conflict with the antagonist, and push the protagonist not only to their physical limit, but also to their spiritual one as well. The hero's adherence to morals and the villain's lack of moral restraint pit the two ideologies against each other in primal combat. In a sense, these fights can be seen as a symbolic metaphysical conflict between warring ideologies. In Joker's first appearance of Batman #1, Batman could have killed the Joker multiple times had he been wielding a gun, and he also could have chosen to let him fall to his death. Batman's choice to avoid guns demonstrates his immense physical might, as he overwhelmed hordes of villains single-handedly with his bare hands. Furthermore, it provides a clear distinction between him and those he fights in the eyes of the public and the police. Batman's moral restraint isn't just heightened by his lack of guns, but especially by his decision to save the Joker, as he went plunging to his death. This scene is especially potent as the Joker had taken advantage of Batman's weakness after falling from the Joker's car, and he shoved the weakened Batman off a ledge, intending to kill him. So at the story's end, Batman actively prevents the Joker from suffering the very fate he had intended to enact upon Batman. Batman's sheer strength wasn't just demonstrated in his ability to hoist the Joker up from doom, but his ability to mercifully save someone who sought to destroy him. This finale demonstrated the two figures not as mere foes, but philosophical diametrically opposed opposites, embodiments of two competing ideologies. In Batman #1, his greatest strength isn't his ability to outmaneuver hordes of enemies, jump onto racing automobiles, or to survive an epic fall, but to extend a hand of mercy to the very hand that tried to push him to his demise. But Batman's deeply rooted selflessness would later be perverted through selfish corporate greed. Similarly, Aang's duel with the Fire Lord also demonstrated Aang's physical strength and spiritual purity. However, Aang, like Batman, could have resolved his conflict in a matter of seconds had he chosen to react with lethal force. Normally, Aang's first instinct when using airbending isn't to fight, but to flee. However, Aang possesses a hidden ability that could have immediately yeeted the Fire Lord. While Aang uses his airbending as a means of pacifism, not all airbenders are quite as good-hearted as him. In The Legend of Korra, we get a small taste of savage airbending wielded by violent hands. In Korra, we watch as Ahir drains the air out of the Earth Queen's lungs, and slowly suffocates her in a vacuum of dreadful death. In other words, airbenders can directly manipulate the oxygen inside the respiratory system. And Aang's most deadly technique wasn't something he learned in Season 3, 2, or 1. In fact, it's something he did in his first appearance in the opening sequence. Remember that little air scooter? But imagine if he tried to make an ever-expanding ball of oxygen inside someone's lungs, which is something that Korra later proved is possible. It wouldn't just make him suffocate, it would explode his respiratory system like an overinflated balloon. Not only would this way overpower airbending, but it would make the show extremely dark and take it to a different height. Additionally, would killing the Fire Lord outright really make him suffer for all of his crimes? Fans had highly anticipated Aang's duel with the Fire Lord since the first season.
Sozin's comet will return by the end of this summer, and Fire Lord Ozai will use its power to finish the war once and for all. Mastering the elements takes years of discipline and practice, but if the world is to survive, you must do it by summer's end.
Aang's duel with the Fire Lord showcased the explosive potency of firebending and previously never revealed abilities. But this explosive match would have never happened had Aang decided to ignore the religious code that had been ingrained in him since his youth. In a similar way, Batman's most dark and complex villain would have been instantly removed had he not chosen to save the Joker's life. The mantle of heroism is extremely heavy. It weighs the protagonist down and restricts their freedom. This intensifies drama and personifies physical conflict into symbolic moral strife. A no-kill rule, when correctly executed, not only establishes a moral anchor, but also becomes the ultimate narrative ankle-weights to heighten drama. While a hammer can be used to build, if wielded incorrectly, it can also smash and destroy. While Batman's no-kill rule started out as a powerful narrative device, it would later be corrupted and turned into an editorial wrecking ball that would completely obliterate Gotham's strict narrative logic in stories like The Killing Joke and Under the Red Hood. In A Death in the Family, Joker brutally murders Jason Todd, bludgeoning him with a crowbar, turning his own mother against him, and blowing up the pair moments before Batman intervenes. Batman is completely crushed and intends to enact justice upon the Joker. Batman has historically proven himself capable of overcoming any obstacle he sets his mind to. To stop him from executing absolute justice, editorial would need to construct an insane, impenetrable fortress of contrived plot armor. You see, Batman's most successful stories generally involve the Joker in some way. Issues involving the Joker would generally attract large sums of readers. In a sense, the Joker was almost like this cow that could be constantly milked for cash. Killing the Joker would also kill Batman, or at least his sales. So the big question was, how could DC preserve their ultimate cash cow? So in order to keep Batman from enacting justice, DC had the Joker join forces with the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, and he was appointed as Iran's official ambassador to the United Nations, because apparently the Clown Prince of Crime has impeccable diplomatic oratory skills.
It is a great honor for me to be here tonight. I am proud to speak for the great Islamic Republic of Iran. That country's current leaders and I have a lot in common. Insanity and a great love of fish.
Now backed by a sovereign state, the federal government orders Batman to stand down, to prevent an international war. To kill the Prince of Crime, Batman wouldn't just be fighting against the Joker, but also the entire US government and the Man of Steel. DC knew that the only way they could stop Batman was to pit their godlike superhero against him. Even with the entire universe stacked up against him, Batman was inches away from success. Following the Joker's speech, he launches an assault on the General Assembly, nearly killing hundreds of innocent diplomats. Here Batman snaps and resolves to end the Joker permanently, declaring, "No more." Now Batman chases the Joker in hot pursuit, managing to board the Joker's fleeing helicopter. During their frenetic struggle aboard the Iranian aircraft, one of the Joker's bodyguards intends to shoot Batman, but misses and kills the pilot, causing the helicopter to plummet into the endless depth of the sea. Naturally, the Joker magically survives and disappears without a trace. Batman urgently yells and pleads with Superman to search for the Joker, but the Kryptonian, who normally could tune in to a mouse a continent away, seems to be completely deaf at this moment. Left empty-handed, Batman notes his utter frustration with the villain's contrived commercial immortality, almost breaking the fourth wall to state, "That's the way things always end with the Joker and me, unresolved." Many people who normally abhor violence would be driven to it after they suffer something as gut-wrenching as losing a son the way Batman did. Even Aang once snapped and almost went John Wick on a group of sandbenders after realizing they had stolen his sky bison Appa. We watched Aang lose complete composure and enter into the wrathful Avatar state. Just moments before he could enact divine retribution, Katara was able to pull him back down to a rational state. While Aang still chose not to unleash his vengeance upon these thieves, he still hadn't chosen to forgive them. He carried a festering darkness in his heart. We watched as the once playful Aang dipped down into a deep-seated depression. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see Batman pass through this grieving process, past the Joker's contrived escape. The following issues almost seemed to completely erase the Robin Jason Todd. It wasn't particularly clear to the viewer whether or not Appa was alive or if Aang would ever see him again. Aang reached his lowest point while escorting a pregnant refugee and her husband across the Serpent's Pass, a narrow land bridge threatened by a mythological sea monster of epic proportions. The whole world looked to Aang for guidance, wisdom, and hope, but how could he lead others when he himself was lost in despair? After escaping the behemoth, the pregnant refugee went into labor.
Oh no!
What's wrong?
The baby's coming.
And her innocence and delicate purity swept all of his anger and sorrow away.
I've been going through a really hard time lately, but you've made me
hopeful again.
This didn't bring him Appa or avenge the evildoers, but his closure brought peace to the viewers. Batman was robbed of such an ending. The next issue seemingly erased Jason Todd, and his story moved on as if nothing had happened to him or his sidekick. To see just how hollow this reset truly was, we have to look at how structurally identical Robin's kidnapping is in Death in the Family to a similar scene all the way back in Batman #1. In both stories, the Boy Wonder is strapped down helplessly as the Joker plans to enact his psychotic torture. Only in Batman #1, the Caped Crusader showed up just at the nick of time and ultimately prevented the Joker from enacting his deranged psychotic perversions. Part of what made Robin's capture so horrifying in Batman #1 is that the young boy was a stand-in for the reader. Joker's desire to not only murder but to torture Robin was a clear message that he would also commit such heinous acts against you if he were able. In this new landscape, Batman was no longer capable of protecting his partner, signifying to the audience that the hero and the foundational ideas he stood for were no longer enough to save the reader from a perilous reality. But as previously discussed, Batman was also made incapable from providing any meaningful comeuppance to the Joker, and this is further heightened in later stories. But because Batman is a relentless mastermind with almost unlimited resources, DC knew that they had backed themselves into a creative corner. Batman wouldn't tolerate a mere slap on the wrist for his murdered son, but editorial wouldn't tolerate the death of their most compelling villain. The writers had put themselves into checkmate. But while the character of Batman could never forget the tragedy of this magnitude, DC's executives realized that the audience would. Instead of providing a definitive structural conclusion to this massive arc, they simply put the Joker on the bench for a year, waiting out the narrative friction until they could safely roll their cash cow back out of the vault. At this point, Batman's no-kill rule hadn't become a malignant tumor yet. If DC decided not to escalate the Joker, psychotic madness, and never mention Jason Todd again, a Death in the Family would have for all intents and purposes been retconned, and Batman's foundational pillars would have remained intact. However, DC also realized something very dangerous from a Death in the Family's massive success. Shock value sells. Instead of moving on, editorial decided to double down, and they published one of their most controversial titles yet.
Alan Moore took us on this, perverted ride with no payoff.
Escalating the Joker's deranged madness to unprecedented levels.
He took characters we love and brutalized them with no great resolution at the end. So I felt it was more like a sort of a pseudo S&M book that, where nobody gets a comeuppance. The bad guys don't get their comeuppance from Batman.
Pushing the cruelty far beyond anything the medium had ever witnessed. In The Killing Joke, Barbara Gordon and her father, the Commissioner, are relaxing in their home, sipping on some warm cocoa. The doorbell rings and she gleefully goes to answer it, only to be shot point blank in the pelvis. The Joker's goons immediately overpower the Commissioner, forcing him to watch as the madman undresses his paralyzed daughter. The comic then instantly jump cuts to the Joker casually eating shrimp. The Joker then undresses the Commissioner, and his impish enforcers leash the top cop like a dog, subjecting him to the photos of the torture of his unclothed daughter. This time, Batman doesn't show up a few seconds late like in A Death in the Family. The Commissioner is tortured and locked in a cage for days on end. When Batman finally frees Gordon, the Commissioner demands that Batman bring him in by the book. Rather than offering a definitive promise, the Dark Knight can only respond with a hauntingly hollow, "I will do my best." Batman then pursues the Joker into a madhouse of mirrors, a visual sequence that symbolizes their endless chase into the profound fractured depths of the Joker's perverted mind. After a violent clash, Batman finally apprehends the Joker, and Batman explains that their rising conflict has left them with almost no alternatives, and soon either one of them or both would have to die. The Joker then laughs and says, "This all reminds me of a joke." The Joker then goes on to explain how there were once two lunatics who wanted to escape their insane asylum. They both make it to the roof and see rooftops stretch across the town in moonlight. The closest building is just a few feet away, and the brave lunatic jumps to the other side. The cowardly lunatic is afraid, and he thinks he'll fall to his death. The brave lunatic declares he'll shine his light out so the scared madman can walk across. "What do you think I am, crazy? You turned it off when I was halfway across." First, the Joker laughs. Then the Batman breaks out hysterically. Batman's laughter soon pivots into a violent rage. While laughing, he angrily grabs the Joker's shoulders, seemingly halfway to killing him. Then it cuts to their feet, and a beam of light shoots out. Batman and the Joker drift apart, and both are gone. What happens? Did Batman kill the Joker? Or did Batman deliver him to the police? If the Joker did live, what would happen if the police never came? Would Batman have delivered the Joker by the book? Or would have Batman snapped and strangled the last laugh out of the clown? It seems the Joker's last joke was about him and Batman. But who is the brave lunatic? The one trying to pull the other out of his own deranged madness? Or the one who had rejected society and fully embraced his despair? These unanswerable questions are what make The Killing Joke a masterpiece. The problem is that because this novel wasn't actually going to be a self-contained story, it ended up removing the mystery of these unanswered questions. Welding this into the spine of Batman's mythos doesn't just ruin the ambiguity of the ending. Even worse, it permanently shattered Gotham's internal logic. Consider the sheer structural hypocrisy forced onto Commissioner Jim Gordon. After being stripped naked and subjected to the psychological horror show of continuously watching his daughter's brutal torture, he stubbornly tells Batman to bring the Joker in by the book. Yet just pages earlier, the Commissioner admitted that prison wasn't a meaningful punishment to the Joker, as the Joker would just simply break out again. Batman saw Barbara Gordon as a daughter, and yet he seemed to think that the Joker could simply be cured despite the fact he had also already murdered Batman's son. Batman no longer cared about neutralizing the Joker as he did in Death in the Family. It's almost like Batman wanted the Joker to run rampant and wild. Perhaps the Joker wanted Batman to flip. Some readers look at The Killing Joke as some sort of twisted victory. That no matter how much violence and torture are enacted upon Batman, Barbara, and the Commissioner Gordon, they won't flip. But Avatar's writers have a much different approach. Even in the first episode, Aang couldn't comprehend the 100-Year War, or view the Fire Nation as evil. Even after watching Zuko terrorize the Southern Water Tribe, abuse the elderly, and threaten to harm innocents, Aang still sought to find the good in Zuko. At one point, when Zuko makes another attempt to capture Aang, the Avatar chooses to forgive, and even laments the fact that they're bitter enemies and not friends.
Before the war started, I used to always visit my friend Kuzan, and he was from the Fire Nation, just like you. If we knew each other back then, do you think we could have been friends too?
Aang's ability to forgive the man who has hunted him relentlessly shows that he truly sees all life as sacred. He could have easily killed Zuko at this point, as he caught him off guard, but instead, he sought to redeem him. While all of Aang's friends were completely shocked that he had no intention of killing the Fire Lord, it was no shock to the viewer who had seen Aang extend a hand of mercy on numerous occasions. Aang's no-kill rule isn't just some arbitrary safeguard he uses to prevent himself from spiraling into evil, but a deeply rooted religious commitment instilled in him since infancy.
The monks always taught me that all life is sacred, even the life of the tiniest spiderfly caught in its own web.
In The Killing Joke, it seems the Joker was trying to drag Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and Barbara into his own deranged madness. In a sense, the Fire Lord wanted Aang to do the exact same thing. The Fire Lord and his forefathers didn't just seek to eradicate the air nomads, but also their culture and religion. Aang was the last practitioner of his belief system. If he chose to kill, he would be committing cultural suicide by violating the core tenet of his philosophy as its final survivor. Aang's actions weren't just driven by a commitment to do good, but to actively preserve ancient teachings which had been nearly erased from the earth. Despite the fact that Aang has a deeply rooted commitment to honor his fallen brothers and live up to his spiritual mantle, he still understands that justice must be delivered. His refusal to kill cannot become the very gasoline that fuels the furious flames of evil. As you will soon see, Batman's complacency and tolerance for the Joker's psychotic evil creates a world where evil is permitted to lash out with unbridled ferocity. In the Red Hood, Jason Todd was miraculously brought back to life. He chose not to seek out Batman for a tearful reunion, but to independently apprehend the Joker and to force the Dark Knight into a brutal checkmate. Batman would be forced to make a definitive choice: execute the Joker or execute Jason. Of course, the stoic hero makes the most logical decision possible, by hurling a batarang at his risen son's jugular. Just as Jason had been heartlessly betrayed by his birth mother who sacrificed Jason to save her own skin, Batman sacrificed his adoptive son to save his own moral conscience. Now, for a second time, life left Jason's eyes by the very hands that should have protected him. Jason falls cold and unresponsive on the floor. Batman says he meant to disarm his son, but accidentally killed him. The Batman seen in the Death in the Family is no more. Batman previously was only stopped from killing the Joker because the federal government and the Son of Krypton intervened. Now Batman would stop at anything to save the Joker, even if that meant committing filicide. Is that heroism? This horrific realization came crashing down upon the Joker like a waterfall, and he burst into a cascade of laughter, and seized the moment to detonate the bombs that Jason had previously rigged. Once again, DC defied all narrative sanity to allow the Joker to seamlessly escape, and they would also later backpedal to retcon Jason's second death, and claim that he also magically survived. Regardless, the damage was done. Batman had made his choice. He would trade his son for the very personification of chaotic violence. Conversely, Aang's commitment to not kill didn't destroy the narrative of his character, but actually propelled the story further. As previously mentioned, Aang's pacifism wasn't just a self-imposed rule, but a means of cultural preservation. But none of this changes the fact that Aang would need to hold the Fire Lord accountable for the countless deaths of innocent civilians and soldiers. In The Killing Joke and Death in the Family, Batman is tested with a no-kill rule by Joker committing the most atrocious crimes that the writers could conjure. Then he would go on to dare Batman, "Will you kill me now?" Avatar's writers found a much more nuanced approach. While Team Avatar suffered tremendously at the hands of the Fire Nation, the writers enhanced the stakes not by making the Fire Lord a cartoonishly untouchable monster, but by showing haunting glimpses of his humanity. Aang had previously learned to overcome his deep despair by holding a pure and innocent baby in his arms, but he would later look upon a childhood painting of the tyrannical Fire Lord Ozai as an innocent baby.
That's not me. It's my father.
But he looks so sweet and innocent.
Well, that sweet little kid grew up to be a monster.
But he's still a human being.
Forcing him to ask a terrifying question. Is anyone born purely evil? If Ozai's own son Zuko could be redeemed, could the Fire Lord be saved too? Aang, a very confused 12-year-old, is left to wonder whether or not the philosophies deeply ingrained in his soul were true. Was it necessary for him to sacrifice his own spiritual enlightenment and morality to save the world? Aang's deeply rooted resolve propelled the plot forward as he came across an ancient mythic creature that bestowed him with mysterious power. The viewers were still left with all of Aang's questions swirling around in their head. It seemed impossible for Aang to win. Either the Fire Lord would slay him, or Aang would betray everything he stood for. Yet Aang refused to take the easy way out, passing 3 opportunities to kill the Fire Lord, choosing instead to engage him in spiritual warfare. For a terrifying moment, it seemed Ozai's unyielding corruption would taint Aang's pure heart. In the end, Aang's goodness proved incorruptible. Aang found a punishment far worse than death. Aang had been gifted the ability to strip the Fire Lord of his firebending. Now the Fire Lord was cursed to live his life deeply yearning the very gift which he believed made him and his nation superior. While Batman's no-kill rule started out with pure and noble intentions, it was later corrupted by corporate greed to facilitate a nihilistic world where evil would be unfettered, and good can seek no true retribution. These changes occurred amongst several storylines, but were all derived from corporate decisions to keep the Joker unscathed, to maximize profit. This shift shattered the foundational pillars that held Gotham together, perverting the comic's moral core to preserve a commercial brand asset. Avatar's writers conversely figured out how to preserve their protagonist's internal morality, and to use his beliefs as an architectural tool to shape a timeless narrative. However, Aang's success comes at a steep cost. His journey needs finality. His story isn't a never-ending cycle that can be constantly milked out for pennies. Perhaps this is why Batman's no-kill rule fails, and Aang succeeds. But I want to know where you draw the line. Let's settle this in the comments below. If DC had actually committed to narrative sanity, who would have been the one to finally force a Batman to break his rule? Was it Jason Todd in Under the Red Hood? Or Commissioner Gordon after the horrors of The Killing Joke? Drop your thesis in the comments. I'll be down there pinning the best arguments.